Welcome to the Genre Hustle, your virtual sci-fi fantasy writers group. I'm Anton.
I'm Jane.
I'm Chris.
I'm Chelsea.
And I'm AP.
And today we are talking about emotional connections, how to get your readers to connect with your characters and connect with your story. Right, Chris?
Yes. I know how to do that so well.
Looking right at you.
So this is a masterclass taught by Professor Zerby.
And I kind of gave the definition there in a sentence, Jane, but you had, before we got on mic, you were talking about the importance of this, and I think that's really where the money is.
Well, does this matter?
I think it's pretty obvious to all of us because we've probably all had the experience of reading something that just didn't resonate and maybe we couldn't put a finger on it, but it's often because we don't emotionally connect to the character and therefore the story kind of doesn't matter to us.
Right.
And it's come up in critique a lot where we'll...
Oh boy, has it ever.
Common top, which is the reason we're doing it today, where somebody will turn in pages and the critique will come back, I don't want to say unanimous, but a lot of people say, I didn't get the character, or I don't understand why the character is doing this, or what their motivation is. It comes out a bunch of different ways.
Yeah,
That never happens to me.
Whatever.
Show 'em
damn you,
out.
Chelsea.
You're
It's always,
excused.
no, the plot doesn't make any sense. Why are you doing this?
Well, it happens to me a lot. So I brought in something.
Oh,
to
good. Yeah, I was going to say you brought an
talk
example,
Lay
right?
it on us.
Yeah. And you are all going to help me with it and make this.
We technically we already have helped you with it.
You're going to help me some more. I need more help, clearly. So this is from my work in progress, The Black Rider, which is it's a buddy cop comedy, but set, but they're not cops. And it's set in like the high Byzantine era-esque, fantasy world. And it's a paladin and a thief reluctantly teaming up to take down the evil overlord.
I love it already.
Yeah.
And a romance, of course.
And a romance.
And they fall
It's
in
a
love.
Jane story.
Yes, it is. It is one of mine. So here I want to read a couple paragraphs from the beginning of Fal's chapter. Fal is the paladin, and this is how he is introduced in The Black Rider. Fal had been awake for at least an hour already when he heard the temple bell chime for Primus prayers. He stood and stretched his stiff knees. His room, hardly more than an alcove, was chilled, but he'd trained himself not to notice, and his skin didn't react to the frigid water as he washed his face and torso. He caught sight of the uniform he was forbidden to wear hanging on the wall over his bedding, a reminder of his shame, a rebuke for his disgrace. He had no idea how much longer he would be required to perform atonement, and he steeled himself for another day as he pulled on the simple linen tunic that peasants wore.
Wow.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
So immediately you can tell he's very closed off, because if I was having a symbol of my shame, and I don't know what he did to deserve it, but if I had a symbol of shame kind of rubbed in my face and it was the only decoration in my room every day, like that, that would break you. I'd be just a weeping puddle on the floor constantly.
Well, it's funny too, and I think this is a mark of what a really good writer you are, but like the language itself is giving us all we need to know. The cold, frigid water, the steel. It's there's no soft edges at all in his room or in his thought or in the language that you're using.
Yeah, you describe it as an alcove.
Yeah. It's like the hall under the room under the stairs.
Yeah,
kinda.
exactly. You're banished to
Yeah.
a small corner
So my
somewhere.
problem is that a lot of you all have read this and kind of said, he feels very flat to me. He feels very unemotive. I can't get inside his feelings.
So here's the thing. So your description of his life, his setting is great, but it's almost like you're filtering his emotional reaction to his surroundings. And I get that you're trying to do something like he's used to this and he's telling himself that it doesn't matter, or he's pushing it down, but we don't get to see any of that. It's almost like you're distancing us from I think there's actually a point where you say something to do with the water, like he didn't allow himself to feel the fridge. So it's like this level of filtering between his emotional reaction to his surroundings and the bleak surroundings themselves. So if you can find a way to tie the two of them together, or for him to be like essentially in denial, and so we, the reader, know that what he's going through is terrible, but he is in denial about it and not letting himself feel the way he should, then that might get us to an emotional point with him where we feel for him, not necessarily because we're feeling the same things that he's feeling, but we're feeling the things that he should be feeling.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real challenge, I think, of writing a repressed character is how do I make the reader have the emotional revelation that the character can't allow themselves
That's
to
a
have.
very tough trick.
And I wonder if you can give him some physical cues that he's not able to control. And so we can get a little bit of a sense of his restraint is slipping. And so maybe there is maybe he has a knot in the stomach, or maybe he has a catch in his breath when he sees his uniform or something like that, just so that, and you can keep it subtle at first and then maybe play with that as kind of like your foot on the gas pedal of Fall's emotional control.
Yeah, or even what are his mantras? What is his training? Like, obviously he got to this point at some point. So what is he doing so that he doesn't feel the cold?
Right. Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and that's very present as well.
Yeah.
I like that.
And it's dramatic. There's a conflict there. He's pressing up against something. And, how does he react to that? So even though he's repressed, he's still got to have some physical reaction to the cold or the shame, which, again, I mean, you've really baited yourself into a corner. It's just one guy in a room by himself with the door closed. Like, you're not exactly making
Doesn't
it
want to
easy.
face his feelings.
Yeah, exactly. You've taken on. You've got a lot going on.
But
there.
also another thing with repressed people, in my experience, has been that on the outside they're just stoic, but on the inside it's this turmoil because because we are third close with him. Maybe we can see something inside of what he's saying, some internal monologue, some emotionality on the inside that he doesn't allow himself to show.
He could do other things to express tension, like picking at his hangnails or chewing at the inside of his cheek or something like that too. That will show us a little more tension.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is too, sort of even zooming out a little bit from this moment. Fal starts off the story in basically an abusive situation. Like he's,
Right.
Suffering abuse among the Janissaries because that's kind of how, and he's normalized it. Like to him, this is the way he was raised, but I don't want the reader to normalize it or to feel the same way. And I need the reader to be like, you have to get out of there, Val, run away.
Yeah. Right,
And
right.
it's such at odds with what the character is thinking and feeling. And trying to handle that is really, I don't know, man. I don't know how to do it.
Do you have the option in some of those scenes of I know that Kieran shows up later and he's kind of Fal's foil, but do you have the option of having a foil character or a foil influence around that can kind of stand in for the reader a little bit and be like, hey, whoa, no.
That's a good idea.
That's how Kieran works for him later. He starts to externalize the wrong.
Yeah.
And we talk about that a little bit later, where we talk about the inner and the outer journey, which is sort of the want versus need kind of stuff.
Yeah, and based off of a lot of your feedback, I have also, and I don't think any of you have read this part yet, but later on in the story, I let Fal start kind of breaking out of his shell, and it turns out he likes this very sort of silly kind of pop music that Kieran just finds ridiculous, and he hums along. And so I'm trying to show that underneath the surface of repressed paladin, there is something that's fighting to get to get out.
I mean, that's the definition of repress. I mean, there's something there that is being pressed down, that's being controlled. So what is it? What is underneath the surface that's kind of brimming there and boiling, looking to get out?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I have a very similar problem in my own work in progress where I have a very repressed character. And I have the added difficulty. Well, the work in progress is called The Anomaly. The main character's name is Jean, and he is sort of like a psychologist for AIs. And he has an AI who is installed in his head that helps him with his job named Moat. And the problem I'm having is that everybody loves Moat and seems to emotionally connect with him.
We do love Moat.
We do.
And nobody connects with Jean. But
It's because you write robots with feelings.
right. But
Moat
so
needs his own sitcom.
yeah, Moat is one thing.
Spin-off.
But so I'm struggling to find a balance there. But so the scene I'm going to read to illustrate the problem, they've been offered, Jean has been offered a job and they're going through the debate period of whether or not to take it. So it's just him and Moat having a discussion. So this is Jean. He paused, struggling to say the rest. If I can't hack it and want to come home, we'll break the contract. We'll leave, no matter what the consequences. We have to be on the same page. Moat shimmered, and the ghostly humanoid morphed into a leaping brown lemur. Jean caught it, and it clambered up his arm onto his shoulder. It was one of Moat's favorite forms the first year or so they'd been together, one he'd often defaulted to when he was feeling overwhelmed or needed reassurance. At least that was how Jean interpreted it. Agreed, Moat said. No matter what happens, we'll stick together. If you don't like the job, we'll break the contract. He scratched the lemur under the chin, and it sat on its hind legs, showing its round belly, and wrapped its ringtail around his upper arm. Okay, we have a lot to do, he said, and not a lot of time to do it.
Oh,
Yeah, come on.
I know. So Moat keeps stealing the scenes, you know. And it's the same thing. You know, part of Jean's character arc, his journey, is that at the beginning of the book, he's been dealt an emotional blow, and he's repressing all his feelings, and he's really struggling to connect with people. And Moat is the only character who happens to be in his head who he connects with.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do about it, you know?
But as the reader, because Jean is repressed and it's tough to get to him, Moat is so accessible. We can see him. You describe what he changes his form.
Right.
And he also, he's all exposition. He says exactly what he means. So as a reader, I can grasp him so easily.
Right.
And so, you know, I'm going on, and he does that throughout the story, which is why Moat is always the favorite character, because we get him, we see him, we understand him. Jean is a little bit more opaque.
Right.
That's part of, I mean, I know that you're trying to go for that too. You're trying to show that this AI is more human than this human.
Right.
And this human has an arc to go through. So, I mean, at the beginning of the book, it's probably a little tough to connect with Jean.
Well,
and
that's
what
my
we're-
struggle. It's like I like his journey, his arc takes him to a place where he's opened up at the end and stuff like that. But like the problem is having the main character for the first 4 or 5 chapters be so closed off that it, like, I'm struggling to make. I want people to go on the journey
Yeah.
With him, not Moat.
Yeah.
with
not-
him. I mean, yeah.
Well, because they come as a package deal at first, and then like their interests start to diverge because
Right.
I think Moat's motivations start to become a little less transparent as the book progresses, which casts a little bit of suspicion on him, which encourages us to start to connect a little more with Jean.
Right.
But I wonder if a way that because Moat is kind of his Jiminy Cricket, and he's doing like Moat
I
is
never thought of it. You're
expressing.
absolutely
Yeah, he
right.
is. But Moat is expressing Jean's interiority, right?
Yes.
Right.
But so what I wonder if this would be helpful for you would be to give us moments where Moat's expressions of Jean's interiority don't 100% jive with what Jean is actually feeling. That way you can have a little bit of tension, and then there can be moments where Jean can decide to or not to stand up for himself and correct Moat.
Right.
Well, see,
Conflict.
I see that as
Conflict,
something
yeah.
that would be further down the line once the arcs begin to progress. I was going to say at
But
the
you can
beginning.
plant the seeds early.
Sure. So yes. So I would plant the seeds by having John at the beginning go along with everything he's saying. So John's kind of like tight and repressed and all that, and Moat's able to calm him down. And so the only emotions he feels are from this one trusted and his only trusted source, which
Right.
is Moat. And that's where you can maybe show some of the emotionality, where he's totally closed off, like screw humans, screw this job. You know, I don't care about anyone or anything, but I do care about Moat.
And I do think doing that is going to clue the reader into trusting that Jean is going to become more emotionally open because
Right.
we see that he is bonded with Moat, and he does, you know, he's not open to other humans, but he is open to
Right.
Moat. And so
So
I
there's
think,
one thing.
yeah, so I think that's a clue to us, and it keeps us invested even if we don't 100% understand Jean right away. You've opened the door to his arc.
Gotcha.
Yeah, especially because part of what you're writing about is the codependency. So if at the beginning it is just that codependent, we can see, oh, he's able to feel these emotions, but it's super unhealthy.
Right.
So that's the journey we're going to see.
And I personally, I think maybe this is just me, but I really like reading about characters who are emotionally repressed in some way. I
Do you now, Jane?
Yeah, I do. I find them, and I like writing about them. And to me, it reminds me of, let's say, like Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games, and
Yeah.
she's also really
Super repressed, yeah.
and she kind of stays that way, right? Because then she experiences PTSD, and that affects
Yeah.
her in a whole other way. But I still find her an incredibly compelling and emotive character. So I guess this is just to say it's totally possible to write a closed off
Do it
character.
right, man.
It can be done.
It can be done.
I guess I would just add that that's in first person, so you're constantly in that moment.
that's a good point.
The drama level is always redlined with her. That's the
Yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's part of what carries that.
Right on. I'll get there, maybe.
Yeah, I believe
You're
in
close,
you.
man. I mean,
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
So I'm reading a book called Borderline right now, and I struggle not to get Madonna's Borderline stuck in my head every time I touch the book or think about the book or update it on Goodreads. But so the main character has borderline personality disorder, and the author does a lot of work trying to get you in the headspace of somebody with borderline personality disorder, or it can be a little heavy-handed sometimes. But to me, it's actually taking somebody who should be kind of unlikable and giving me a lot of emotional connection with her because it's so emotionally present. She's very, very available. So this is like kind of the contrast between you guys. And I like neither Fal or Jean would work with this level of immediacy. So she says, I love people randomly and suddenly, and it's a curse most of the time. When it isn't, it's a lifesaver. And so she goes on to say, I'm not sure if I even want to work with this guy. I'm not sure if I want to work on the Arcadia project or if I want to live in this creepy house with these strange people. But I would have walked across the 405 for David Berenbaum right now, and that was enough. And so people with borderline personality disorder, like people are either all good or all bad. They either love them 100% or hate them 1,000%. And so to know that she is really attached to this one guy and just thinks the world of him, now I'm really interested because it's like, oh my gosh, she's just made herself incredibly, potentially emotionally vulnerable to somebody who she just met. And like, wow, that's a really bad idea. But
yeah.
gosh, I'm on board.
But I want to read about it.
Yeah,
Well, that-
I want to
yeah,
read
there's
about
some
it.
drama
Let's find
there.
out what
Right.
happens.
That's a great example, Chelsea, and I think it kind of puts a highlight of what we've been talking about in terms of what works, what doesn't work. So switching from examples to kind of some tips and tricks, I think it would be good if we kind of walk through ideas for people. And I'll start with one that I learned in a writing class a few years ago, which was if you're having trouble writing your characters or having trouble getting into the characters or making connections, write all five senses. So normally when you write it's always what they see, most of it. But if you can get into a scene, the trick was write all five senses. So the character walks in the room, what do they see? What do they smell? What do they taste? What do they touch? Which one did I miss? What do they feel? What do they hear? What do they hear? And
4 senses is still good.
4 senses, 6 senses, just pick a number. But the point is that by going to that extra sense, not just the visual, you're letting the reader into something deeper. And so you may not keep all 5, and you don't want to keep all 5. But on the reread, on the edit, you may find that one of the other senses, not the visual, the sense of smell may pop, or the touch, or the hearing. And that's the one you want to keep, and that draws the reader in. And I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, that's really a good tip, especially, I think sense of smell is talked about a lot. Like we really do, it triggers memory for us quite strongly a lot of the time, and that can be really effective.
And it resonates with readers because they have all 5 senses as well, not just the visual. And so
Not all readers have all 5 senses.
That's a really
great
good
point.
point.
I'm sorry, you're right, but
And there are more than 5 senses.
thank you. Yes.
Well, and
Glad we're covering all
So
our bases.
you're mostly wrong, but thank you.
Have you listened to this podcast before?
And different people are going to respond to different scents. Like one person might smell blood first and kind of make interpretations about a scene based on that. And another person might be like, I just smell bleach. I don't know what you're talking about.
I see what you did there.
But the werewolf character is going to be like, yes, but I smell the blood.
Yeah, and that's very evocative, and that again, that'll bring your reader into your characters. And so And we were talking off mic, Chris. You were talking about the example from the Blade itself.
Yeah. So I would say one of my favorite characters of all time is Sanin Glokta from the Blade itself, who is a horrible, horrible person. He's the Inquisitor and he's a torturer. And what makes him so interesting is, so he was tortured himself in the past, and he has all these horrific, physical disfigurements and issues. Like he has trouble walking upstairs, and he's sort of like, when he's torturing people, he's sort of reliving in a sick way his own trauma. But what's so interesting about it is, like, he does these terrible, terrible things all throughout the book, and yet he's so compelling.
You just want to keep reading with him.
And I think it's like, he's managed it. So Abercrombie gives him so many moments of, like, you're really in his point of view when he's walking up those stairs, or he's trying to get out of bed, and he's in so much pain, and he feels so shitty about himself, and he's thinking how people think of him as like a horrible, twisted, disgusting person. He gets to you. And like, by the time you're partway through the book, you're like on this awful person's side. It's amazing.
Not even part way. It's he's got these great internal asides throughout the whole thing.
Yeah,
Those are so amazing, because on the outside, again, going back to Fall, on the outside it's gonna be repressed or whatever. But his internal lines, I mean, he'll even like finish a sentence of dialogue in his head. So it'll be like, of course, Archlector, like, I want to kill you and put you in the river, or whatever else. Like,
yeah, he's also really funny.
He is funny.
Which goes, having a funny character also is a good way of creating a connection, to the reader. But it baffles me, because again, he does horrible things.
God, yeah.
He's a terrible person.
Yeah.
So I recently finished reading a craft book that's basically all about what we're talking about. It's called The Emotional Craft of Storytelling by Donald Moss.
So just read that.
Yeah, so just read that, and you'll know.
Finish listening to the podcast and then go listen to it.
Sorry.
But one of the things that he suggests doing, and it really resonated with me, was finding the unexpected reaction, or the sort of surprise reaction. So, and that kind of like, A, creates depth in your character, and B, it highlights something very, different, unique, a perspective about your character that kind of pops in the reader's mind and draws them in even further, as opposed to saying things like, she looked daggers at him, or his insides twisted with fear. Like we've read those so many times that they've become sort of cliche, and we almost gloss over them. But if you could find a new and unexpected way to describe an emotion for your character, and this piece of advice really resonated with me when I was reading The Sharing Knife, which is a romance, sort of fantasy magic romance novel by Lois McMaster Bujold. And she has these two characters who, in the beginning, of course, that they're going to get together. And you're like, okay, yes, they're obviously attracted to each other from the very beginning. And the surprise comes when the naive, sort of sheltered young farm girl makes the first move, and she does it like even before the first act is over. And you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that.
It's moving so fast.
Oh my goodness. And it's so surprising and delightful that happens. And then the rest of the novel is sort of about how they navigate their sort of, relationship after they've already declared that they're into each other, which I wasn't expecting. And yet it's also so in character for them, right? So it has to be surprising, but not like shocking, like why would the character do that? And I think that's a really wonderful balance if you can hit that.
Another thing to think about, another technique that you can use, I think, is having layers to your character. So especially in sci-fi and fantasy, or in fantasy, like there's often a quest, there's often a goal, and it's a big goal maybe. But your characters, if they're completely just focused on that all the time, and they're without distraction, they can come off very one note. So a good way to have, like, I think, is to give them other interests. So a good example, like I'm thinking of Fal, when you're talking about Jane, his interest in that quirky music. That's a really good example. Like
He loves Justin Bieber.
he loves Justin Bieber, right? So like it's incongruous and it gives him more depth, more sort of like, again, layers.
Well, and it's a way for Fall's repression to be expressed in a very unusual but a very healthy way.
Right, which goes back to your reveals, your surprises, Jane. I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think, and to your point, we were talking a little earlier about how then you create some backstory meaning for why Fal loves this kind
Right.
of music, and maybe that gets revealed to the reader, maybe it doesn't, but it adds this sense like, oh, there's more going on with this character than I
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
they're
is
more
important for-
three-dimensional and like we all like goofy stuff, and it's a way like, or like we all have these like little secret obsessions and stuff that
Well, and I think part of what we're getting at is that, it's hard to relate to someone on a fantasy quest because we're not surrounded by dragons and swords and whatever else.
You're not.
Yeah, I'll work on that. But it's really easy to relate to someone who has this one quirky interest. And so if you discover this one thing about this character that you can relate to, then you start getting connected to the character.
right.
Yeah, and that's really what it talks about. So to your point, Chris, the layers is, yes, they're doing this quest, but also, oh, they also hate their father. Oh, and also, they don't get along with their brother. Oh, and they have to go to school. And oh my God, I hate all this stuff. The characters...
They can also like stuff, Anton.
Yeah, I'm like, oh
You know,
God.
it doesn't. Your layers are all about hating family, but others, not everybody's have to be.
Like, he might
I
also
don't-
like enchiladas.
I don't understand what you're talking about. That doesn't... What are you saying?
Nothing.
But Jane, this goes to something we talked about before. This is another technique that you talk about, which is the inner and the outer.
Right.
Yeah, right. So speaking of sort of layers, another way, so interests and kind of, how the background informs what they care about is one. And then another way you can layer is thinking of your character being on two journeys, essentially. One, you might consider the exterior journey, which is what you said, Chris, the quest, right? Like we have to kill the dragon. That's the exterior journey. But then there's often, and there should be, I think, in most good stories, there's an inner journey of like, what does the character need? And sometimes you hear it described as the desire versus the want, or the need versus the want, or something like that. And so smashing those two together can be a really effective way of creating depth. And this is once again not my original idea, but it's
You know what? Take it.
There are no original
it's
ideas.
from Donald Moss, and he talks about this. And because I recently reread Hunger Games for like the fifth or sixth time, so now I know that book really well. But it occurs to me that Collins does this incredibly well with Katniss, where she really tightly ties together her exterior need, which is obviously to survive the Hunger
Right.
Games,
Yeah.
right? But then her interior is really to connect with other people, and to me, it's about how do you acknowledge that you matter to a community. How do you live with that sort of vulnerability of mattering to a community and to a group. And for me, the really poignant moment, the reason that this is such an emotionally affecting moment is because those two journeys collide when Rue dies.
Right.
And I don't think I'm giving anything away. Hunger Games has been out for like years.
Yeah.
If you haven't read it by now. So Rue is both influences her external journey, which is that, she was an ally in the Hunger Games and would have helped Kat survive, but she also reminds her of her little sister. She also has, is one of the few people that Katniss has allowed herself to get close to and to care about. And so when she dies, it's like, okay, now my ally is dead, and this little girl who I looked at as a little sister who was depending on me has also died. And so that just shakes her to her core.
And the inner journey, the need can often be part of the reveal, part of the character arc, which I think is really important. So the character, like you said, the reader understands the quest, but the need that the hero has to find out, the thing that they really need in the story, comes in little bits and is slowly revealed, and that's that's kind of the nice secret part of the story. That's, and I think it's the tougher part to come up with, but it's essential too for this kind of emotional connection we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Sure.
And Chris, I think you're almost there with the anomaly. Just to go back to that, because
Thank you,
Jean, well, Jean has an outer journey, which is his mission on Aldo Space Station. He has his inner journey, which is to I don't think that he kind of quite realizes it, but it's his need to not be so codependent on Moat and to learn how to connect with other people and learn how to
Re-enter society.
and learn how to emotion by himself. And then also he has his kind of want of, I want to be a good talker again.
Right.
And so I think that if you can link up the I need to learn how to communicate and connect with people and with the idea of I want to be a good talker again.
Oh.
Yeah, I think you'll be bringing more of those motivations together, and now Jean has a real goal, an inner goal, and it'll drive really nicely with the outer goal.
Yeah, man. Duh.
write it.
Just
Thanks,
do it.
Chelsea. I'll just turn the
All your
pages over
answers
to you.
here.
I'm on Twitter at
I feel emotionally connected to all of you.
Glad we can solve at least that problem
I feel
today.
very
so.
close to everyone.
So what are your, you, the audience, the people listening, what are your, let's hear your favorite characters that you've connected to emotionally, and what are you struggling with emotionally in your work in progress? Where do you feel that you are failing the mission? And hopefully there's something in this episode that you can point to that'll help you out. And why don't you tweet us at Genre Hustle? We're on Instagram at Genre Hustle, or you can email us at thegenrehustle@gmail.com.
And if you feel so inspired, please leave us a review. It really helps us out.
Absolutely. Rate us.
Highly, hopefully.
Highly, yeah.
But really, we'll take
You're
any
really asking-
feedback.
yeah, you're
We want to
asking for
know.
trouble.
We want to know what you think.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.